Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is pollster Bob Ward with the firm Fabrizio Ward. Bob, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
The AARP released a new poll post-debate between former President Donald Trump, current President Joe Biden, and they are numbers coming out of Wisconsin. So take it away. What stuck out to you?
Well, so here we are, just under 4 months from the election. We surveyed voters in Wisconsin immediately after the debate through last week, and we're seeing that Donald Trump has a 6-point lead over Joe Biden in the state, which I think is considerably higher from the polling averages we saw pre-debate, which Trump had maybe a 1 or 2 point lead in the state. But on the Senate race side, incumbent Senator Tammy Baldwin has a 5-point lead over her Republican challenger, Eric Hovde. So we are seeing, splitting of tickets in Wisconsin, as we've seen in other swing states. I think the big story in Wisconsin is whether or not young voters are going to show up in the numbers that they have in previous elections. We ask a question in this survey about how motivated you are to vote, and it's from a 0 to 10 scale. And when you compare voters under the age of 50 to voters over the age of 50, there's about a 21-point gap of those who say 10 out of 10, I am motivated to vote in this election. We've seen this in other places, in other swing states. This lack of motivation really spells problems potentially for the Democrats. So even though Tammy Baldwin is ahead, if a key base of the Democratic constituency, that is younger voters, don't show up, her 5-point lead could quickly evaporate. And it's key for both the presidential candidates and the Senate candidates to be focused on those older voters who are going to show up. And they can get them by talking about issues that are important to them.
So let's talk about the issues that are important to them, because what I'm hearing from you is that older voters are going to matter, and they're going to matter more this election because they're the ones hitting the polls come November. So what are those big issues that they care about most?
Well, I think if you were to sum it up, it's the economy. We look at politics today, and yes, there are cultural issues that are important to both sides of either side of the political spectrum. Among Republicans in Wisconsin, as in other places, immigration and border security are really high. Among Democrats in Wisconsin, you see issues like threats to democracy, abortion, and reproductive rights being very high. But across the political spectrum, you see issues like the economy, jobs, inflation. I'll throw Social Security in there since we're talking about older voters, because that's a big issue for them. All of these issues netted up are bigger than those cultural issues. And so when you take voters 65 and older, what I'll call seniors, in Wisconsin, the presidential race is tied. In the Senate race, Tammy Baldwin's up by 2 points. Seniors are a competitive voting bloc that all campaigns need to focus on. So talking about issues that are economic focused, like Social Security, are really important to get those voters to pay attention to your campaign.
That's a really interesting stat, and I had that written down too, that voters older than 65 are tied in Wisconsin when it comes to Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Do you think that is because do they have a little more sympathy or understand or give Biden a little bit more of a break when it comes to his age and mental fitness?
Well, I think we've seen in not just Wisconsin, but in other battleground states that we've polled, today's 65 plus voters tend to be more liberal than conservative, lean more Democrat than Republican. That differs from what we've seen in elections past. And I don't know if it's necessarily a sympathy factor with Joe Biden, more so than a demographic factor. There's only 5 years of baby boomers who are not age 65 and older. These are the people who came politically aware in the late 60s and early 70s. And so they are a little bit more Democrat leaning than voters 65 plus have been in previous elections. So I think their issues are really focused on what's impacting me. So we ask a question in this survey about, are you worried about your personal financial situation? And, the answer is yes, 60% of Wisconsin voters are worried about their personal financial situation. And so when I'm talking about the top issues being inflation, rising prices, the economy and jobs, and Social Security, I think these are the things that are paramount in voters' minds. And I think they are competitive from a political standpoint. If you're talking about those issues and can address those concerns, you're going to have an edge as a candidate.
By the numbers, the economy is doing better than it has been in recent years. But as we know, sentiment always lags the actual numbers. Do you think between now and November, sentiment will change when it comes to the economy? Voters will feel more favorably to Biden because they're saying, hey, okay, my wallet feels a little better. These kitchen table items are a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, so let's think about the metrics when we say the economy is better. Oftentimes we look at the stock market, the employment rate, things like that. If you think about older voters, many of whom are retired, in this survey in Wisconsin voters, just a data point to spot a light on this, you have, just make sure I get it right, 64% of voters 50 plus say that Social Security either is or will play a major role in their future, in their retirement. These are folks who are not really thinking, less about sort of the stock market and more about the check that comes in the mail every month and will it be there for me? And so, yes, I think there is time for the environment to change. We've got, like I said, just under 4 months to the election, and so that's certainly a possibility. But older voters are, many of them fixed income and are pretty much know their financial situation. They know how much things cost at the grocery store. They know how much the rent or the mortgage is, for those who are paying it. So I think, those types of fundamentals, are not likely to change between now and the election unless there's a dramatic change in, for example, everyday prices of goods.
I do now want to pivot to that Senate race you're talking about, because last time we talked, you said down ballot races were flying under the radar because you said you've got an incumbent president and a former president going head to head in a rematch. So I think it's taking a lot of the oxygen out of our political space. Now we have incumbent Senator Tammy Baldwin beating her Republican challenger. But as support wanes for President Biden, do you see that race really tightening? And do you see it becoming a toss-up come November?
It could. It really could. And I alluded to this earlier. The lack of motivation among a key constituent of Democratic politicians are younger voters. And they support Tammy Baldwin, a lot more than they support President Biden. It is unusual for a Senate race to lead turnout in a presidential election year. So if you're not enthusiastic about who's at the top of the ticket, even though you may like the person running for Senate, there is a chance you may stay home. And that is a real threat to a lot of the down ballot Democrats running this year. So can that change? Absolutely. There's chaos in Washington right now about what's going to happen, right? Big things can change. But the bottom line is folks like Tammy Baldwin and other Democrats running for office really need to focus on a ground game to get voters out who, they think might ordinarily turn out in a presidential year. And this year they may not.
When you're thinking about recent elections starting in 2016, Democrats were excited to vote for Hillary Clinton because she was first woman, amongst other things. People were intrigued by Donald Trump because he wasn't the typical politician. Then 2020, there was more enthusiasm there. Is it unusual to see this lack of enthusiasm this close to an election.
Yeah, and the lack of enthusiasm really is focused at younger voters. Older voters are very enthusiastic, whether they're Democrat or Republican. They're paying attention. We asked if people watched the debate, for example, on the 27th. 75% of voters 50 plus watched the debate. Only 50% of voters under 50 did. So it is that is not unusual per se. Older voters typically are more engaged. What we're seeing this year is if you look at Joe Biden's favorability rating, his job approval rating among these younger voters, he is getting the worst ratings from an age group that is the most Democratic. He's getting worse ratings among younger voters than some of the more Republican age groups, like voters 50 to 64. That is unusual. And that is one of the reasons why it's a real question mark as to how many of these voters turn out. And that should be a real concern for Democrats down ticket.
You alluded to this earlier, but there is disarray in Washington right now. Democrats are behind closed doors, reportedly panicked in public, seemingly nudging President Biden to step aside. What are you looking out for between now and November?
Well, I mean, as a survey researcher, I want to know who the candidates are going to be, right? Who the presidential candidates are going to be, who the vice presidential candidate's going to be. And so if that changes, obviously, it's, really throws things up in the air, and a lot of polling will be done if something like that happens. So that is a big X factor that really is above my pay grade as to what's going to happen. But it would absolutely shake things up in a race, and we'd have to start over to a certain degree on what 2024 is all about.
And how much do you think the debate shook things up in this race? Because people were unenthusiastic. Everything seemed baked in. We saw this race 4 years ago, and it seems like now there's a lot more conversations. Do you think the debate shook things up in voters' minds?
I think it probably to a lesser extent than what it shook things up in sort of the political class of Washington's minds. I think voters are more focused on what impacts them, the pocketbook issues, the things that are important in their day-to-day lives. And so I think probably the debate had a lesser impact on that. But if you're a partisan on either side, certainly the debate had an impact. If you're a Republican, you're probably feeling pretty good post-debate. If you're a Democrat, probably not so good.
Bob Ward, I appreciate the conversation. I hope to have more of them as the situation develops between now and November. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.